if being cared for makes you tense, if kindness doesn't land as warmth but as pressure, there's a good chance you didn't learn love as something you can receive. You learned it as something you have to earn. And before we go any further, I want to name something clearly. This isn't a character flaw. It isn't being cold. It isn't you being ungrateful, or too independent, or secretly manipulative. Sometimes it's just what happens when your nervous system associates love with conditions. You can be emotionally intelligent. You can understand your patterns. You can even be the person everyone describes as so kind, so supportive, so reliable. And still, the moment someone turns toward you with care, you feel a subtle tightening, a reflex. You minimize, you deflect, you make a joke, you say you're fine, or you do something even more common. You repay. Not because you're selfish, but because receiving doesn't feel neutral. It feels like a debt being created in real time. So the question isn't, why can't I just accept love? The question is, what did your life teach you about what love costs? Because for some people, love was never something that arrived and stayed. Love was something you secured, managed, maintained. Love was something you performed. And if that's you, then what we're going to do in this video is slow down and make sense of it psychologically, emotionally, and in the body. Not to push you into sudden vulnerability, but to remove the shame from the pattern and show you what it might look like to start receiving without feeling like you're losing yourself. The core wound behind this is usually simple to name and complicated to live with. Somewhere along the way, you internalized a belief that you are valued for what you provide, not for who you are. Not necessarily in words. Sometimes nobody ever says it out loud. It was implied. It was in what got rewarded. It was in what was noticed. It was what was tolerated. Maybe you were praised when you were helpful, easy, mature, responsible, low maintenance. Maybe you were only met with softness when you were doing well, when you were performing stability, achievement, usefulness. And when you needed something, when you were messy, sad, uncertain, overwhelmed, the room changed. The attention thinned, the patience shortened, or the emotional tone shifted into irritation, guilt, avoidance, or disappointment. So you learned a painful equation. Being lovable means being valuable, which creates a contradiction that can follow you into adulthood. You crave closeness. You want to be known. You want someone to stay even when you're not on. But when love is offered freely, when someone is gentle without you earning it, you don't just feel relief. You feel exposed. You feel suspicious. You feel like you're being watched. Or you feel that quiet internal urgency to make it fair, to balance it, to prove you deserve it. Because if love arrives without conditions, your system doesn't automatically interpret that as safety. Your system interprets it as unpredictability. And unpredictability, for a nervous system that learned to survive by earning, feels dangerous. This is where the earning identity forms, not as a conscious choice, as a strategy. If you've lived this, you probably recognize the persona. You're the helper, the achiever, the one who anticipates what everyone needs before they say it. You're the person who replies quickly, who remembers birthdays, who checks in, who notices changes in tone. You're the person who feels responsible for the emotional temperature in the room. You might be the strong one, the capable one, the one who doesn't ask for much, the one who is praised for being resilient while quietly wondering if anyone would stay if you weren't. And the thing about this identity is that it doesn't always feel like a mask. It can feel like integrity, like being a good person, like being mature, like having high standards. And sometimes it is all of those things. But when it's driven by fear of being a burden, fear of being abandoned, fear of being too much, then even your goodness becomes a form of self-protection. Overfunctioning becomes safe. Being impressive becomes safe. Being needed becomes safe. Because if you are needed, you are less likely to be left. If you are useful, you are less likely to be criticized. If you are low maintenance, you are less likely to trigger someone's discomfort. So you become the person who earns. And it works, at least in the way survival strategies work. It reduces conflict. It creates predictability. It secures approval. It keeps connections within controllable terms. But it comes with a hidden cost. You stop practicing being loved without performing. And then, later, when someone tries to love you in a way that doesn't require performance, it feels unfamiliar. And being unfamiliar doesn't feel safe. This is where psychology helps us understand what's actually going on. without turning it into a diagnosis or a label. In attachment terms, conditional love trains the nervous system to associate approval with safety. It teaches you that connection depends on meeting a standard. That closeness is earned through being pleasing, capable, or emotionally convenient. So instead of love feeling like a place you rest, love becomes a place you work. And if you grew up in an environment where emotions were unpredictable, where care could turn into criticism quickly, then you may have developed survival roles that kept you connected. One of the most common is the fawn response. Fawning isn't simply people-pleasing, it's a threat response. It's the nervous system recognizing that conflict, rejection, or emotional withdrawal might be dangerous and adapting by becoming agreeable, helpful, and attuned. Another survival role is hyper-responsibility. You take on more than is yours, because being responsible makes you feel in control of outcomes. If you can anticipate the problem, fix it early, manage the mood, then maybe you can prevent the rupture. And these strategies can look incredibly functional from the outside. You might be successful, trusted, respected, even admired. But internally, it can feel like you're always slightly braced, like you're one mistake away from losing warmth. So you keep earning, because earning once worked, and the brain doesn't easily let go of what once kept you safe. But the most important layer here, often the one people overlook, is the nervous system layer. Because you can understand all of this intellectually and still feel your body resist receiving. That's not stubbornness, that's not immaturity, that's conditioning. For a lot of earners, receiving triggers threat cues. Not because receiving is inherently threatening, but because what receiving used to mean in your early life was complicated. Receiving might have meant there were strings attached. It might have meant you would owe something later. It might have meant closeness, followed by withdrawal. It might have meant being noticed, then being judged. It might have meant being helped, but in a way that came with control. So even when someone offers you clean, healthy care, now care without manipulation, your body may not recognize it as clean. Your body recognizes the category, attention is on me. And if attention used to come with risk, your system prepares for risk. That preparation can look like a tight chest, a shallow breath, a sudden urge to do something, anything, to restore equilibrium, to make it even, to make sure you're not taking too much. Or it can look like numbness. You might receive a compliment and feel nothing, or receive help and immediately move on, without letting yourself feel the warmth. And then you tell yourself you're fine. But underneath that fine is often a subtle message. Receiving is not safe. Receiving is not stable. Receiving makes me vulnerable. So you keep yourself on the giving side of the equation. Because giving feels active, giving feels controlled, giving feels like you're managing the terms of connection. Receiving requires surrender. And surrender, for a nervous system shaped by conditional love, can feel like stepping into the unknown. This is where the pattern starts, quietly eroding self-worth. Not dramatically, not in a way that's obvious to other people, but in a slow, internal way. When you live as an earner, relationships can become transactional inside your mind, even if you would never treat anyone else that way. You track effort. You monitor whether you're doing enough. You anticipate disappointment. You feel pressure to maintain your value. And that pressure makes love feel like an evaluation. There are these moments that seem small to everyone else, but feel heavy to you. Someone offers help, and you say, "No, I'm good," and you might even mean it. But later, you feel tired, and a quiet resentment appears. Not because you're entitled, because a part of you wishes someone would insist without making you pay for it. Someone compliments you, and instead of feeling seen, you feel pressure. Now you have to maintain that version of yourself. Now you can't rest. Now you can't fall apart. Someone gives you a gift or a favor, and your mind immediately calculates how to return it. Not because you don't appreciate it, because appreciation, in your system, is intertwined with repayment. And that's where guilt shows up. Guilt when you need support. Guilt when you're not productive. Guilt when you want something. A quiet guilt that says, "I'm being too much." And loneliness shows up too. Sometimes you can be surrounded by people who love you and still feel alone because you don't feel met. You feel valued, you feel appreciated, but not held, because being held would require you to stop earning long enough to let someone see you. And then shame arrives in the moments your performance breaks down. Burnout, illness, Grief, depression, any season where you can't keep being the capable one. And instead of that being a normal human chapter, it can feel like personal failure, like you're losing your worth. Because if your worth was built on output, then rest feels like a threat to identity. This leads to the internal conflict that keeps so many people stuck in this pattern for years. You want love deeply. You want softness, reassurance, someone staying without you earning it. But what feels safe is competence, control, emotional self-sufficiency. You might even pride yourself on not needing much. But often, that pride is covering grief. The grief of having needs you learned to hide. So you live in a paradox. You want connection, but you fear what connection might cost. You want to be known, but being known means being seen in your needs, and needs feel dangerous. You want someone to take care of you, but if someone takes care of you, you feel indebted, exposed, or powerless. And your coping strategy earning both helps and hurts. It helps because it gives you a structure for belonging. It gives you a sense of control. It gives you a way to prevent rejection. But it hurts because it blocks intimacy. It keeps love at a manageable distance. It keeps you in a role instead of in a relationship. And the most painful part is that you can't always see it while you're inside it. You can just feel tired. You can just feel like something is missing. You can just feel like you're always almost okay, but never fully rested. So what happens if nothing changes? Not in a dramatic, catastrophic way. In the slow, realistic way. Over time, chronic overfunctioning leads to emotional exhaustion. You might become numb not because you don't feel, but because feeling becomes too expensive. Resentment can build quietly, especially when you're the one who always shows up. You might start withdrawing, not because you don't care, but because you're depleted. And then guilt pulls you back into giving, because your identity is tied to being good, being reliable, being the one people can count on. It becomes a loop. Give, deplete, withdraw, feel guilty, give again. In relationships, you may find yourself in unequal dynamics. You carry the emotional labor. You do the remembering, the planning, the soothing, the repairing, and you might not even ask for reciprocity, because asking feels like a risk. Or you might test love without meaning to. If you can't receive it directly, you might look for proof indirectly. You might overgive and see if anyone notices. You might downplay your needs and see if anyone insists. You might disappear emotionally and see if anyone comes closer. Not because you're manipulative, because you're trying to answer an old question. Will you stay if I don't earn you? And there's also an identity risk. Because when your identity is built on being the strong one, the helper, the achiever, you become a role instead of a person. And if productivity drops, the identity collapses. Who am I if I'm not useful? Who am I if I'm not the one holding everything together? That's when love becomes something you believe in intellectually, but can't tolerate somatically. You might know, rationally, that you deserve care. But when care arrives, you can't let it land. Your body rejects it like an unfamiliar food. And that's not a permanent fate, but it is a trajectory, if it's never named. So here's the insight that changes the emotional tone of this entire conversation. You didn't become someone who earns love because you're needy. You became that because it was the safest way to stay connected. That sentence matters because it moves you from shame to understanding. Your resistance to receiving is not proof you're broken. It's proof you adapted. Receiving requires trust. It requires timing. It requires nervous system capacity. And if your system learned that love had conditions, then of course unconditional care feels suspicious. Of course, receiving feels like a setup. Of course, you'd rather be the giver because the giver has the control. So the problem isn't that you give love. Giving love can be beautiful. The problem is that you learned giving was the price of admission for being cared about. That is a different thing. And once you see that, the path forward isn't to stop being generous. It's to stop using generosity as self-erasure. It's to build the skill of receiving in a way that doesn't flood your system. A middle path. One where you keep your capacity to contribute, but you remove the belief that your needs disqualify you. And this is where we have to be careful, because the answer is not, just be more vulnerable. The answer is not, just let people in. If your nervous system has been trained to treat receiving as threat, forcing yourself into sudden openness can feel like betrayal of your own boundaries. So instead, think of receiving as a capacity you can build slowly, receiving without rushing to repay. letting care land in your body before you explain it away, allowing small supports, one ride, one favor, one moment of reassurance without turning it into a debt contract. That's not passive, that's skillful. One of the most powerful skills here is boundary clarity. Not the kind that's harsh, the kind that's honest. If you notice that giving is becoming self-erasure, you practice saying, "I can't today," without writing a paragraph of justification. That alone can be deeply nervous system challenging for an earner, because justification is part of earning. But boundaries teach your system. I can exist in a relationship without performing. Another skill is naming the awkwardness out loud. Sometimes receiving becomes easier when you stop pretending it's easy. You can say, calmly, "I'm not used to being helped. I might get a little awkward, but I really appreciate it." That sentence does something powerful. It lets you stay connected without needing to be perfect. Selectivity is another crucial piece. Not everyone is safe to receive from. Some people give with strings. Some people create dependence. Some people give so they can later remind you. If you've been conditioned by conditional love, you may be especially sensitive to that, sometimes accurately, sometimes reflexively. So the practice is not receive from everyone. The practice is receive from people who respect you, who move slowly, who don't punish you for having boundaries. And then there's self-awareness in the moment. When someone offers care, notice what your system does. Do you apologize? Do you deflect? Do you rush to repay? Do you downplay your need? That awareness gives you a pause. And in the pause, you can choose a smaller response. Instead of immediately paying it back, you just say, "Thank you." And you let that be the full sentence. That can feel almost unbearable at first. Not because it's wrong, because it's new. Finally, there's nervous system regulation. Receiving isn't only a mindset shift, it's a body shift. So when help is offered and your chest tightens, you don't argue with yourself. You ground. You breathe lower. You unclench your jaw. You soften your shoulders, even slightly. You send your body a message. I'm not in trouble. You're not trying to force comfort. You're building tolerance. This is how healing often looks. Not a dramatic transformation, but a series of small moments where you don't abandon yourself. And that brings us to a soft resolution. Because I don't want to leave you with a project. I want to leave you with the truth. You are allowed to be loved in ways you didn't have to earn. And learning to receive is not a personality trait you either have or don't. It's a skill, a capacity, something your body can learn. Slowly, over time. You don't have to force yourself into instant vulnerability to prove you've healed. You don't have to suddenly become someone who asks for everything. You can practice receiving in small, honest increments. You can start by noticing the moment you minimize, the moment you repay, the moment you say "I'm fine," when what you mean is "I'm tired." And instead of judging yourself, you can get curious. Where did I learn that love equals performance? Who taught me that being cared for comes with conditions? What would it feel like just for a moment to let care land without earning it? You don't have to answer all of that today, but you can let the question exist without shame. Because the part of you that learned to earn love wasn't trying to ruin your life. It was trying to protect you, and you can honor that protection without letting it run your entire future. So if you take nothing else from this video, take this. You're not here to audition for love. You're here to participate in it. Not as a role, not as a function, not as a performance, as a person.